And now this is where we can differ by using these raised beds compared to growing in the field in a conventional setting, because they recommend a row spacing of 30 centimeters. But we're going to go about 15 centimeters so we can fit. Welcome back to Edwin Binney's Community Farm and Education Center. It is April 15th and it's about 15 degrees outside. Today I was hoping to get quite a bit more done than I had expected, although the weather wasn't really cooperating. Previously we've had a lot of rain, so the fields are very wet, as you can see here. Rather than getting some items planted into the fields, I was able to get some compost turned and fill up some of our black raised beds with some of that compost and plant some radishes. So the compost that I was using for these black raised beds were actually made starting last fall. We had a school group visit and we taught them all about composting and how it works and your correct ratios of carbon to nitrogen, and we talked about the biology of how compost is broken down, all the microbes and bacteria and the larger organisms that are involved in the process. So they had a lot of fun kind of constructing the compost bins, and over the winter we just let it break down. It did heat up for a little bit, but then obviously with the winter it frozen, and then now that we're well into spring it was completely thawed out. So it's great to use our own homemade compost. This stuff was really light and airy to work with, and it had a really good structure and moisture holding capacity, and that's why I didn't water in the radishes, because the compost was already quite wet. The radishes that were planted were a variety of different radishes. We had cherry bell, we had sparkler white tip, we had a Halloween blend, we had some crimson giants, and some garden giants. So now that we've got these raised beds filled up with some fresh compost, we're going to plant some radishes in them. We have a couple different varieties. The first one is going to be a cherry bell radish. And on these packages that you'll get from the seed companies when you go and buy your seeds at the store, they will give you directions on planting them. So for these, the seeds are going to take about 4 to 7 days to germinate. They need to be planted about 1.3 centimeters or half an inch deep, so not very deep. Seed spacing is the same, 1.3 centimeters, half an inch. Plant spacing, once the plants sprout, we'll then thin them out so that those bulbs, those radish bulbs, can take form. And they recommend a 5 centimeter spacing between plants. And now this is where we can differ by using these raised beds compared to growing in the field in a conventional setting, because they recommend a row spacing of 30 centimeters. But we're going to go about 15 centimeters so we can fit 9 rows of radishes in here, where we would only be able to fit about 4 rows. To seed, we have our jar of seed, and we're just going to sprinkle the seeds in. Not too close together, or else we'll be thinning out a lot of plants later on. To make our straight lines, we have this piece of wood, and then we have these little notches on these raised beds, and we'll just bump this wood up against there. Then we'll take our trowel, make a nice line. And then we can do the next row of seed. Once we've got our seed in, it's really simple to plant. All we have to do is cover them up. So I'll put you guys on fast forward, and I'm going to plant these 9 raised beds, all with radish. Now, as you're watching me sprinkle these seeds into the rows for the radishes, you might be thinking that that is a lot of seeds for that little amount of space. However, we have had some issues with germination because these seeds are a little bit older. We often get donations, which we are very grateful for the seed donations that come in, but they do tend to be a year or a couple years older, and some of them are even past that. So sometimes their germination will fall. But we overseed, and then if we have a high germination right, then we can always thin them out to the correct spacing. But if we don't have a high germination rate, then they're already going to be spaced somewhat appropriately. Whereas if we had spaced them appropriately to begin with and we had a poor germination rate, then we might be in a little bit of trouble when it comes to harvesting enough to get to everybody that we support.